Well, thanks for having me. It is good to be with you. I have to say, I would have preferred it in person. But it's difficult to chat on Zoom, isn't it? But we'll sort of do our best, I think. Um, what I want to do really is just share my own story with you. It's a story which is personal to me, obviously. I hope you find some connections with it and find things that you can chew on and apply in your context. Your connections with this whole question of bringing yourself to work will be different to mine, but I hope there are some pathways in what I'm about to share with you which you can use. I just want to start by saying, well, what do I really mean by bringing myself to work? For me, it's authenticity. That's at the heart of all that I'm striving to have done over this last 30 odd years or so. Seeking to be the same person all the time, wherever I might be, whatever I might be doing. And of course, the person I am is strengths, its joys, its weaknesses, its flaws, its struggles, and that's every day and probably before lunch we do all of those things. So there's a big parcel of who we are that we might be thinking about bringing to work. I think authenticity is difficult per se, but probably is even more difficult in the context of work, because at work we have to perform in some way, shape, or form. We have to be effective, we have to be efficient, we have to be competent, reliable, and we have to be able to do things which we're not naturally inclined to do. It seems to me that sometimes the reason we talk about the struggle for authenticity is because it is exactly that. It is a struggle between competence and effectiveness, and struggle, weakness, and stuff that we are made of. And there is a clash so often between those two things. That's why it's properly described as a struggle, I think. Why does it matter at all? For me, it matters for two or three reasons. The first one is entirely practical. If, when we think about it, at home we're one thing and at work we're another, there is a sense that, disaster is bound to strike. Those worlds are going to collide sometime, and that collision can be messy. And for me, I'd like to avoid the mess. So that's partly why trying to sew the whole thing together, it just practically makes sense. The second reason for me is that I'm a follower of Jesus, and I don't think you can follow as easily if you compartmentalize life. If we just live in compartments, then all we're doing, I think, is religious observance, and that's something, but I'm not sure it's a life full of faith. So for me, there's a lot involved in that whole thing of followership of Jesus. There is a sense in which life has to sew together if we are faithfully following as our life's journey. The third reason is I think it's more likely, if we're able to bring ourselves to work, be authentic, it's more likely that we'll find work a flourishing space, that we fit more easily into space at work. So those are the reasons it matters to me. There may be others that you can think of and you might want to add to that pot. Of course, all of this presupposes that I know who it is that I'm bringing to work, or who it is that I want to bring up to work. So presupposes I know something about the self that I'm talking about being part of the work context. Now that might sound weird, but in my experience, actually, we need to pay attention to ourselves. It takes effort, it takes time, it takes concerted effort to reflect on who we are, who we're becoming, who we want to be. So there's it's a job of work to be done. We need to know about ourselves to be able to bring ourselves to work, to be able to celebrate our strengths, to be able to recognize our weaknesses. So that's just a bit of scene setting. I'd like just to tell you my story, and then we'll find gateways in around some of those things I've mentioned on context into that story. My journey's largely been around leadership in and around work. And I would want to say that I don't think leadership is about position really at all. I don't think it's a hierarchical thing. It's we all are leaders at some stage in our lives. It's a sense in which if people are following us, then we're leaders in whatever context that might be. Certainly, the older we get, we're supposed to get wiser. I know we get more experienced. I'm not sure it's wiser. But we find that people maybe are starting to look to us as models of something. Now, it might be a model they say we'd like to follow. Equally, it might be a model that they say, no chance, I'm not going down that route. But we are models in some way, shape or form. So I think leadership does play a part in all of our stories at some stage. I touched on leadership when I was at school and college, but the roller coaster ride began in earnest when I qualified as a solicitor in the mid-1980s. And as you did in those days, you were privileged to be given or allocated a secretary who you would work with from day one. And then you'd grow your own team of people who would work alongside you. And I did that for a few years. And as I look back now, what I think I was doing in leadership terms, I was setting myself up as the expert commander. So I was the person who issued the instructions and simply expected obedience. How wrong can you be? How quickly can you learn? But that's how it started. And I think there was a sense of performance for me about that. It was hard work. It was probably pretty unnatural. And I don't think it blessed any of the people involved, but that's how it started. At the age of 29, so I was quite inexperienced, I was actually made a partner. Those days are gone. Partners have to work for longer before they get there these days, but in those days that wasn't so unusual. And I suddenly found myself amongst 6 or 7 chaps, all of whom were partners. And I'm an equal peer. I'm not, I don't have any position of power. I don't have any set hierarchical position, and I need to be able to influence my peers. I certainly didn't do that for the first couple of years. Believe it or not, I was probably more struck dumb than anything else by the whole experience. How do you shift from being in a place where you issue instructions and people do things to influencing peers? That's a big change. Whilst I didn't speak, I observed, and I began to see partners doing leadership in a way which was very different to anything I'd ever seen or experienced, doing it out of relationship, not out of power or position. And I think that's where I would trace my beginnings of thinking, hang on, there might be a different way of doing this thing. I'm not really authentic here. I'm trying to do something which just doesn't fit. It fits very uncomfortably. For 10 or 12 years, I served as a partner, did my own charity thing. I was a charity lawyer, and then came the final phase, if you like, the final 10 years of my working life, when I was appointed as senior partner of the firm. So similar functions to the chief executive of a middle-sized company. I clearly wasn't a natural choice for senior partner. I was a very reluctant senior partner, and I've always described myself as that. And I certainly wasn't campaigning to become senior partner. The vacancy which arose because of the death of a very dear friend, and all of us were reeling from that. So there was no campaigning. There was a sense of, we need to wait and see who might be the next choice, the next person to take on that mantle, as it were. When I actually became a nominee, I was still really unsure about the whole thing. I remember I'm single. I've never had children, so that wasn't obviously the management and nurturing of children wasn't a clash of responsibilities, if you like. But I did have dependent caring relative responsibilities. So I cared for an elderly friend of mine who lived with me. She was in her 80s at the time. And I also had aging parents. They lived in Cornwall, so a trek on a good day, never mind in the depths of winter. And I distinctly remember getting hold of one of my colleagues who was a bit of a confidant and saying, how can this be right? It can't be right at this juncture in my life when caring responsibilities are just going to grow. They're not going to they're not going to ease. And I might be expected to be on call 24 hours a day as senior partner of the firm. How can I do that? How can I hold those responsibilities together? And I remember his response to this day. He said, yes, but what if you can show how it can be done and done differently by someone precisely at this juncture in your life? And that's challenge settled heavily. I did take on the challenge. I served initially as a joint senior partner with a colleague of mine. And I can remember now that the conversations we had about how we would get up every morning and think, do you know what? Somebody's going to expose the joke this morning, aren't they? So that whole imposter syndrome conversation, am I really doing this? Are we really doing this? Are we really, fitted for this role? So we shared the struggle about authenticity and who we were in the role from an early stage. I did my senior partner thing, and I retired then as senior partner in 2014 and left the profession generally in 2016. I'd always said I would do that in my early 50s. But leadership sticks and it follows you around. So I've served on the board of a national charity, on the leadership team of the local church, and I quite often find myself drawn into conversations with individuals in a sort of coaching capacity. So it sticks, it's there, it's a part of who I am, who I've become, I suppose. So that's the journey in summary. But what have I learned, or what steered me in that journey from very reluctant, I would say anxious senior partner to someone who at least enjoyed some of that space eventually. Whether or not I was effective in that role is for somebody else to judge, but I enjoyed it eventually. Just a few things that I would say in that. I would say that whole thing about learning to live a life that isn't about compartments was absolutely fundamental to me. Paul, in his letter to the church in Rome, urges the Christians there to offer themselves as an act of spiritual worship, their whole lives. And I absolutely love the paraphrase which Eugene Peterson makes of that verse. He says, so here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. That was fundamental, a telling point for me that actually this is about weaving life together. We're meant to weave life together. God is as interested in my work life as he is at home, and there should be a theme of worship all the way through it. So for me, absolutely a fundamental moment when that realization came to be. And it coincided with a sense of God's call into the workplace, leadership in the workplace. I read Os Guinness's book, The Call, in which he says, responding to Jesus's call touches the world of fishing as well as preaching, the depths of the lake and not just the shore. So that there was a sense of that growing sense of call, which changed a lot. I also felt, copying doesn't do it for me. I need to find the me version. So I wanted that to search for integrity. Richard Higginson describes a life of integrity as a life where there's a coherence between the different parts of it. The value systems professed by the person are adhered to in all areas of life, public and private. And in my experience, that can take you into some fairly uncomfortable spaces. So I remember long conversations with colleagues about what trust looks like, What does a second chance look like? Is there a third chance, a fourth chance, whatever? Wanting to be honest with people in appraisals. So not just nice and vague, but encouraging in a provocative sense, provoking change, provoking a sense of reality. These are things that because we want to live a life of integrity, they take us into challenging space where we have to work those things out. It's hard work, but finding the me and the my way, if you like, is rewarding in a way which is difficult to imagine until you've been there and done it, sort of thing. The whole thing about working hard at understanding myself, I started out with I would describe it as a pathological objection to self-assessment tools. I really hated personality testing with a white hot heat. But I was persuaded to go on a Franklin Covey 7 Habits course. And to my surprise, I thought, actually, some of this resonates. And I actually traced my reflective practice back to then, I think, probably. Since then, I've taken every opportunity to get feedback, to ask people for mentoring, to do the Enneagram. So I've recently done the Enneagram. I'd recommend all those things, as long as you have some help interpreting it, because if you take it mistakenly at face value, then these things can be discouraging at best. They sit in a place, and I think you need people alongside you who can help you earth those things in a way which is helpful and not discouraging. So working on myself, taking time to reflect and taking time to think through what it is that, how I've been in certain situations and how I might be better going forward. That's played a real part in that authenticity journey. Of course, if you know yourself, or you get to know yourself, then you know that there are weaknesses in the picture. And you become more able, I think, to honor those and accept those as part of who you are, and to be able to ask for help in a way which in some ways makes you very vulnerable. So I found myself using coaches and mentors, and I still like to search those out now. I think there's a part that we play in togetherness in the journey, which I just think is something which is good to acknowledge. And I've worked with some amazing people, people who have joined in team-wise and made it possible to achieve so much more. So I've had fantastic PAs. I remember one, I bought a car, I was working, goodness knows how many hours I was working, bought the car, but then that's one thing, isn't it? Then you've got to sort out all the bits and pieces that go with it. And they're ringing me up, asking me, all sorts of questions that I'm thinking I haven't got time to answer. So I ask my PA to sort it, and she sorts out my registration plate. She says she's chosen it because she knows she's going to have to tax it. So she's chosen one she can remember it. It's the SPV, stands for Senior Partner Vehicle. I'll never forget that. I'll be able to sort it, do it for you on your behalf. There's a wonderful sense of togetherness and support in that comes from a heart that wants to make more of everything that we are together. So I've valued people alongside in a way which is difficult to describe, and I would say team working is just a lovely experience. Acknowledging the struggle would be my final thought, I think. I do think that sometimes we are uncertain. Sometimes home and work do collide. I said that I was caring for an elderly friend of mine in the latter years while she was still at home here. I was leaving her at 7 and getting back at 7 at the earliest. And she got very anxious, and she would sometimes ring me tens of times in succession. There's a pressure on that which can cause all sorts of angst for you and your colleagues. Being able to actually acknowledge that's a struggle and asking someone else to help. Again, I had a PA who took those calls for me. There's a sense of the shared vulnerability is a position of strength. I came across a book written by Simon Walker called The Undefended Leader. He uses the acting metaphor for leadership, but he talks about working at overcoming the desire to manage what the audience see of me. And I can really understand that actually we want people to see us at our best. We want to do that performing thing, and there are moments and seasons for that. But if we can show something of who we really are, then there's much more encouragement. There's the opportunity for other people to support and to flourish in the supporting, but there's also an encouragement for them to step into places that make them feel naturally uncomfortable. So there's a growth for everybody. I know there's a lot of words there, and I wanted to finish by trying to leave you with a picture. During Advent this year, I dipped into the Archbishop of York's Advent book for 2018. I'm a bit behind, which is a book called The Art of Advent, written by Jane Williams. And she takes a picture for each day of Advent. She takes, one of the pictures she chooses is a picture of David and Goliath by Degas. You can see it online. If I'd have been there, we could have looked at the picture, but it is online. It's on display at the Fitzwilliam in Cambridge. It's a very simple picture of David and Goliath. We all know the story, the young shepherd boy who takes on the giant, experienced Philistine with just the tools of the shepherding trade. So a sling and 5 stones, and he's flatly refused to wear the armor that he was offered before, but made him feel uncomfortable. It would be really good for you to look at the picture yourself, but her comments I'd like to read to you. The picture, by the way, shows David in the foreground, and you can just see Goliath on the horizon. So it focuses not on the comparison between the two, but very much on David and his stance. Degas has not chosen to show the contrast between the small, unarmed boy and the huge breastplated soldier. Instead, because David is the foreground, Goliath looks almost negligible. We're seeing David's spirit and courage, his arm confidently poised to whirl the fatal stone, his hair ruffled in the breeze. Inside David's head, Goliath is already defeated. David doesn't try to use Goliath's weapons. He's not overawed into believing that there's only one kind of strength. He brings what he is to the fight. He's a shepherd boy. He's spent years defending his sheep from wild animals, never needing a sword or armor, and he doesn't lose confidence now, just because Goliath has more conventional weaponry. Degas' sketch shows us the sheer exuberance and exhilaration of David's trust in the unlikely weapon whirling above his head. This is the beginning of an adventure to discover what kind of might a shepherd has. For me, that says all there is to say about authenticity, which sits alongside vulnerability. David brought himself to work, if you like, in a way which I've sought to do quite simply too. And I'd urge you to think about how that fits in your context as well. So I hope that's helpful and thought-provoking.